Hi, my name is Adijos Sunday. I am a lecturer and a public affairs analyst. I have a PhD in international relations, another PhD in defense and strategic studies. I have a first degree in political science and a master's degree, in international relations. I love to teach, I love to do research. And so the essence of this video is to make learning easy for students of international relations and global politics, wherever you are, anywhere in the world. I am sure you're going to find this video, very helpful. In my first video, we looked at international relations as a course. I tried to, conceptualize international relations using various perspectives of scholars. We also tried to understand the rationale behind international relation as a field of study, international relation as the actual act, of state relationship. And of course, national interest is key as far as international relation is concerned, because the actions and inactions of states within the global system is motivated by the need to protect, to promote, and also to project their national interest. But don't also forget that in international politics, there is no state that's a state of autarky, because of course resources are unevenly distributed, and so no state can survive in isolation, just like man. So in the first video, we try to look at the concept of international relations. We also try to look at some basic concepts in international relations: international politics, foreign policy, diplomacy, power, national interest, bipolarity, unipolarity, multipolarity, bilateralism, multilateralism, and so on and so forth. Today, we're going to be looking at, approaches to the study of international relations. No matter the knowledge you have as far as global politics is concerned, your knowledge of approaches or theories in the study of international relations will help you. Okay, and so for today's class, we're going to be looking at approaches. To the study of international relations. There are various approaches. Sometimes we could call these theories. Okay, a student may want to ask what's the difference between approaches and theories. We use them, interchangeably, even though a theory could be seen as a more advanced form of approach, right? So, approaches to the study of international relations. What are these approaches? We have several approaches as far as the study of international relations is concerned. One of the approach or theory is realism. Okay, realism is a theory. Number 2, we have idealism. Okay, number 3, we also have what we call decision-making approach. Okay, number 4, we also have the political economy approach. Number 6, we also have what you may like, if you like, you can call it world system, theory, etc. There are several theories or approaches to the study of international relations. However, before we begin to look at each of these approaches, it is important that we understand what theories are all about, or if you like, what are approaches, right? For every field of study, there are things that distinguishes them. In international politics or international relations, and on a broader scope for it, of course, in political science, we make use of approaches or theories. Sometimes we could call them models. Even though models are like the early stages, models are designed specifically for specific issues or for specific phenomenon. But theories are more universal in terms of application. Right? So what are theories? Theories, in the study of international relations. A theory is a scientific tool, right? A theory is a scientific tool. You can't be a carpenter without tools. You can't be an engineer without tools. You also cannot be a good international affairs analyst or a good scholar of international relations without having your basic tools. And your basic tools are theories. Okay, theories are important tools. They are mechanisms that enables one to understand, to explain, and to predict. Your knowledge of theories helps you to understand global politics better. A theory is like a lens that gives clearer vision. When somebody is suffering from myopia or hypermyopia or astigmatism, and you go to see, an optometrist, they recommend a lens for you to correct the effect, of that eye defect that you have. So you begin to see clearly. People who cannot see long distance, when they put on certain kind of lens, they are able to see. In international relations, your knowledge, your understanding of global politics is determined by the quantum of theories that you know. And so for us as scholars in the field of international relations, theories are very key. In fact, if you are a student of international relations and you do not know all these theories and some other theories, then it means that you are likely going to be a quack in the field. These theories are the tools that helps you to understand, that helps you to make critical analysis of global phenomenon, of course, within the international system. And so theories are scientific tools that enables us to understand, to explain, and to predict. And like I said a while ago, a theory is like a lens that gives clearer vision and like a signpost that gives direction. Yes, you got me correctly. A theory is like a lens that gives clearer vision and like a signpost that does what? That gives direction. And so in international politics, to appreciate the dynamism of the international system, to appreciate and understand the nature of global system vis-a-vis the interaction between states within the international system, knowledge of theory becomes inevitable. For instance, why does the United States of America, behave the way it does? Why the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? This you can only explain when you have adequate knowledge of theory. And so a scholar in international relations is different from that person who does not have knowledge of theories and is claiming to be an international affairs analyst. You can't compare it. Okay, so knowledge of theory, knowledge of approaches, or knowledge of models are very critical as far as the field of international relations is concerned. Because these are the tools that you need. These are the tools that will enable you to understand, to demystify, to interrogate, to examine, the nature of global system. So having said that, let's take a quick look at some of these theories that we have on the board. The first one is realism. The second we have idealism. Then of course the decision-making approach, the political economy approach, the word system approach. You even have what we call the theory of functionalism, neo-functionalism, and so on and so forth. So there are different theories, and because international system is dynamic, new theories are also coming up. Right? Newer theories are also coming up because the international system is dynamic. And so, for various aspects of international relations, there are various theories or approaches that can help you understand them. Right? If we're talking about, for instance, regionalism and integration, then of course, David Mitrani's theory and NSHA's theory, will come up. Theory of functionalism, neo-functionalism. If we're talking about collective security, collective defense, there are also theories that can help you understand these issues. But on a general note, we just want to take a look at some of these very important theories of international relations. Okay, so we're going to start with idealism. What is this theory all about? As a student of international relations, every theory you want to discuss, the first thing you need to understand is to look at the rationale behind those theory. Right? Number one, we look at the rationale behind those theory. Number two, we try to understand the basic assumptions of those theory. Then number three, you should be able to apply that theory in understanding global politics. Then number four, you should be able to critique the theory. There is no theory that is 100% perfect. Every theory has its own limitations. And so as a student, like I said, understand the theory, what led to the theory, who are the proponents of the theory, right? What are the basic assumptions of the theory? In what way can you apply that theory? Then number 4, what are the limitations associated with the theory? And so, our first theory we're going to look at is idealism. Alright, idealism. What is idealism all about as a theory, and of what relevance is the theory of idealism? Idealism as a theory of international relations. You can't talk about idealism without casting your mind back to, the pre-World War I period. Of course, you could recall that World War I was fought between 1914 to 1918, right? 1914 to 1918. And of course, this war was disastrous. This war led to the loss of lives and properties. This war made the international system unstable. And so scholars began to ponder, how do we have a world that is free of war and conflict? How do we have a war that can encourage more of collectivism, that can encourage, cooperation among nations of the world, rather than encouraging conflict and global war? Right? It is on the basis of this that the theory of idealism was bettered. Right? And so idealism is connected to the experience of the global system before and during World War I. And so scholars began to think, like I said, panaceas to global conflict, to international war. And so scholars like Woodrow Wilson were major contributors as far as idealism as a theory is concerned. Right. And so, like I said, the theory is an attempt to see how cooperation can be fostered among nations of the world, to see how conflict and war can be prevented within the global system. And so, one basic assumption of realism as a theory is the fact that man is naturally good. Do you agree with that? That man is naturally good? And of what business is the goodness of man in international politics? Don't forget, in our first class I said that man and state have similar characteristics. Just like man, the state can also not survive in isolation. Just like man, the state is also dynamic. And so if man is naturally good, the implication is that the state will be good, because the state is managed by man, by human beings. And so for the idealist scholars, man by nature is good. Man by nature is not a selfish being. The international system is peaceful and not anarchic. And so for the idealist scholars, one way that you can promote cooperation is to form international organization, is to have regional integrative mechanism, is to bring about institutional framework where the collective interests of every state will be protected. And so idealism as a theory is more of, promoting collectivism, promoting institutional framework within regional, sub-regional, and global level, where countries can come together to promote their interests. And so these are the basic assumptions. And it is out of the ideas of the idealist school of thought that the League of Nations was established as an international organization that will help to galvanize, that will help to integrate the interests of every state within the global system, thereby promoting international peace and security. And so the League of Nations is one of such international organizations bettered as a result of the proposal, right, of idealism, that the formation of international organization, the coming together of states within the global system, can help to promote world peace. And so the international community now formed the League of Nations. Okay? The League of Nations. In 1919, right? The League of Nations was formed. But whether or not the League of Nations was able to prevent the occurrence of another war is a different issue altogether. And of course, your guess is as good as mine. Remember that the League of Nations was formed in 1919, and in 1939 there was Second World War. That means that the recommendation of idealism as a theory eventually failed. Right? But that is one of the limitations of the theory. That regardless of the fact that nations can come together, does not guarantee that nations will not be selfish. Remember, it was Hans Morgenthau who said that the selfishness of man has limits, but his desire for power is limitless. And so that means that just as man is selfish, nations will also continue to be selfish. And so regardless of the coming together of nations to form the League of Nations, we still had World War II, because nations, even in that collective framework, were still selfish, were still interested in promoting their own selfish interests. And of course, we had World War II in 1939. That is one major limitation of idealism as a theory of international relations. And so some other persons will also argue that you cannot draw a conclusion that man is naturally good. You cannot draw a conclusion that the international system is peaceful and not anarchic. What have we seen today? We are seeing conflict all over the world. If the conflict is not between states, the conflict is within a state. These are part of the issues, that has questioned the authenticity of idealism as a theory of international relations. But one cannot also debunk the fact that the basic assumptions and tenets of idealism has really helped. With the collapse of the League of Nations, we also now had the United Nations. And so far, since the United Nations was established, we have seen a lot of improvement in international security, in international cooperation, and so on and so forth. That, of course, is not to say that the United Nations does not have its own challenges or limitations. Of course, it has its own challenges, and I'm sure we will look at that when we begin to discuss international organization as a topic. All right, so that is that about idealism as a theory of international relation. On a simple note, we said that theory has a lot to do with the experience from World War I and post-World War I. The scholars felt that the only way to resolve conflict and prevent future conflict was to form international organizations. Scholars also agreed that man is naturally good, that the international system is not anarchic, that cooperation, collectivism will be panacea to world peace. These are the basic assumptions of idealism as a theory of international relations. And of course, like I said, Woodrow Wilson is one of the major proponents of the theory of idealism. So let's take a quick look at realism. Realism. This is one of the oldest theories in the study of international relations. Realism and idealism, two very old theories. In fact, some scholars have argued that all the theories in international politics as a field of study can be summarized into just idealism and realism. Because these are the oldest theories in the study of international relations. What is idealism all about? What is realism all about? Before we look at what realism is all about, it is important to note that there are factors that influence the realist scholars. There are philosophies of ancient scholars, ancient traditions that contributed in shaping the perspective of the realist scholars in relation to contemporary international politics. Right, so let's look at this. The realist scholars, to a large extent, were influenced by, works of people like Niccolo Machiavelli. You remember his book titled The Prince? That book, if you've not read it, you need to get a copy. Right, The Prince. The works of The Prince, the work of Niccolo Machiavelli titled The Prince, contributed in shaping, the understanding of the international system from the realist perspective. Of course, in that book, Machiavelli portrayed the prince as someone who must be very selfish, as someone who must do everything to capture power and perpetuate himself in power. Right, and remember one popular, quotation which Machiavelli has that has to do with the end and the means. That of course the end justifies the means. The realist scholars strongly believe in that philosophy, that as far as international relation is concerned, the end will always justify the means. Before I forget, it is important to note that sometimes the theory of realism is also called the power theory. Okay, it's also called the power theory because it has a lot to do with power. Right, so number one, I said the works of Machiavelli contributed in shaping the philosophy and principles of realism as a theory. Another basic work, classical work that contributed is the work of Thomas Hobbes. You remember Thomas Hobbes' analysis of the state of nature, where he talked about the Leviathan, where he talked about the state of nature as a state where life was brutish, solitary, nasty, and short. That life was one of survival of the fittest. It was a state where might was right. These are things that contributed. And of course, the state of nature was such that man in the state of nature was a selfish being. And so if you like, the basic principles of realism is a direct contradiction of the tenets of idealism as a theory. Where idealism is saying that man is naturally good and man is not a selfish being, the realist scholars, as far as they are concerned, man is by nature a selfish being. Maybe I should ask you that question. Are you a selfish being by nature? Are you really selfish? Your guess is as good as mine. As far as the realist school is concerned, man is selfish by nature. And don't get it wrong, remember, why are we talking about man? I said a while ago, the behavior of man is reflected in the behavior of states. So if man is naturally a selfish being, it means that every state within the international system is selfish. No state, and I say that without missing words, there is no state within the international system that is not selfish about their national interest. Some states look philanthropic. They give relief materials, they give aids, they give interventions. They contribute in other countries in their development. Are they St. Vincent de Paul or are they Father Christmas? They have undercurrent in whatever they are doing. Every state does whatever they do because they have interest to promote, they have interest to project, and they have interest, to protect. And so when countries, especially in developing economies, begin to receive aids, interventions from these advanced capitalist economics, don't get it wrong. They have interests that they want to achieve. Right? So man is naturally selfish. Man by nature is a selfish being. As far as the realists are concerned, the international system is anarchic. As far as the realist scholars are concerned, the formation of regional framework, the formation of international organization is not the panacea to global peace. In fact, to the realist school of thought, that is just like, it is more or less utopia to conclude that once regional frameworks are formed, once international organizations are formed, once state-formed collective integrative framework, that guarantees international peace. As far as these scholars are concerned, it is utopia to believe that. And so, what is it all about then? The realist school of thought are more interested about state pursuing power. They are more interested about states having sufficient power to the point that they are capable of defending and protecting their territorial integrity. Remember what Lord Action says, that power corrupts and absolute power does what? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think it was Clausewitz who once said that if you want peace, you must prepare for war. And that means that preparing for war means that you need to have as much power as you can. And of course, this has encouraged what we call arms race. Countries all over the world are struggling. Take a look at the budget of countries. The budget for defense is usually very high compared to the budget for education and for other sectors of human society. Why? Because countries want to be powerful. Because countries don't want to be at the mercy of other countries. Because power gives opportunity for deterrence. Power gives opportunity to defend your territorial integrity. And so the idealist theory is directly opposed to realism. Realism is more critical, if you ask me. Realism is more realistic, as its name implies. Because the fact remains that global politics is about power equation. And so countries that are powerful will always have their way. And so how do you explain the increase in the proliferation of nuclear weapons? Every country wants to acquire nuclear weapon. Every country wants to develop intercontinental ballistic missile to the point that even the international system is gradually becoming unsafe. And now we're talking about arms control and disarmament. Right. And so these are part of the basic, tenets of realism as a theory of international relations. One scholar you cannot do without, as far as realism is concerned, is Hans Morgenthau. Hans Morgenthau. Hans Morgenthau is one of the major proponents of the theory of realism. And if you have not read his book, you need to get that book titled Politics Among Nations, The Struggle for Power and Peace. Very interesting topic. Politics among nations, the struggle for power and peace. How can you be struggling for power and peace at the same time? It means that if you have power, you will enjoy peace. And that is the driving force of realism as a theory of international relations. Before going too far, one major criticism of realism is the fact that it emphasizes excessively on the role of power. Everything about realism is power, power, power. It means that for states to achieve their national interest, they must have power. Is it not possible to achieve national interest with diplomacy, with negotiation, rather than war? And so the argument of some scholars is like realism as a theory promotes a lot of conflict, talks more about conflict. There are several means through which nations can achieve their national interest, not necessarily with conflict. We have seen diplomacy as a very good strategy for promoting national interest. And so some realist scholars will also say that war is diplomacy by other means. Of course, that's the interesting thing about international politics, international relation as a field of study. So, ladies and gentlemen, so far what we have been able to do is to conceptualize theories. We can't begin to discuss approaches or theories to the study of international relations when we don't even understand what theories are all about. And so we started by saying theories are scientific tools that enables one to understand, to explain, and to predict. We also said theories are like lens that gives clearer vision and like a signpost that gives what? Direction. And so the more knowledge of theories, the more clearly you will understand global politics. The more clearly you'll be able to analyze and interrogate what is happening within the global system. The more clearly you'll be able to understand the behavior of states within the international system. Right. We also said there are several theories in international relations. Idealism, realism, institutionalism, decision-making theory, the political economy theory, the neoliberal theory, the neoliberal institutionalist theory. There are several theories. Adam Smith theory of liberalism, especially when you talk about international trade. There are several theories that explain several issues as far as global system is concerned. But for today's class, we have looked at idealism, and we have also looked at realism as a theory of international relations. But before I end this class, it is good that we understand the applicability of this theory. And this is very simple. Your knowledge of realism tells you why some countries behave the way they do. You can't explain US behavior and US foreign policy without your knowledge of realism. You cannot explain the behavior of Russia without your knowledge of realism. You can see what Russia is doing against all odds, against international intervention. Russia is still intervening within, the territory of Ukraine. Every effort to bring an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine has proved abortive. It is because, as far as Russia is concerned, the end justifies the means. And that you will appreciate with your knowledge of realism as a theory. Why do we have countries running to acquire more arms? That you can also explain with your knowledge of realism. Why do we have conflict among nations within the global system? That you can explain with your knowledge of realism. Right. Okay? Then talking about idealism. And I said one major achievement of idealism as a theory of international relations is the fact that its tenets led to the formation of the then League of Nations, then of course the United Nations. And this is even domesticated at various continents, right? In Africa, you have the African Union. In Europe, you have the European Union. In Asia, you have the SAD, you have the Southeast Asia Development Community. There are several regional integrative frameworks born as a result, of the propositions or the basic assumptions of idealism as a theory of international relations. And you cannot take that away. These regional integrative framework, these international organizations have contributed in one way or the other in promoting global peace and security. They have contributed in one way or the other in promoting international development, economic growth, and of course, promoting human security within the global system. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the next class we're going to look at some other theories of international relations. But like I said, these two theories are the oldest theories as far as the study of international relations is concerned, and they are critical and they are standing the test of time. Thank you and do have a blessed day. Stay out of trouble. My name is Dr. Adejo Sunday.